Welcome to another Sales Hacker webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today after a long weekend. Hope you all feel well rested and ready to pick something up because we've got something new here today for you. It kind of blew my mind when I was hearing about, I thought customer stories was like, yeah, you just pick the biggest logo, you tell the story, it's great, and you just hope for bigger and bigger logos so you can tell bigger and bigger stories. Turns out that's maybe not the case. There are a couple other mistakes people make when they're telling customer stories. And we're joined today by Devin Reed, who's going to tell us all about those mistakes and how to do it right so you can flip it from having your story hurting your win rate to having your story helping your win rate. Devin, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah. Always excited to be here. I was just fanboying Colin. Love Sales Hacker. Love hanging out with Colin on the webinars.
We were complimenting each other's shirts before everybody joined on. It was a real love fest. So before we jump into, because I know Devin, I always love having Gong on because you guys really bring the data. And then also because you were the second sales hire at Gong, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I celebrate 2 years at Gong next month, and I was the second sales hire. Was on the what I guess called the global team because we were so young. You had no boundaries to the mid-market team, and then most recently over to the content strategy side of the business.
Yeah, and so between all the data Gong has and your own experience growing Gong and growing yourself with Gong, you guys have amazing stories to tell, which is perfect for today because we're talking stories. For the audience, I know you all know that Sales Hacker webinars are different than all the other webinars you go to. We actually like to interact, and you join the live version for a reason. You can catch the recording later. We'll send it to you if you have to step away, but for today, go ahead right now down to the bottom of your screen, click Q&A, introduce yourselves, let us know who's here. If you want to throw a question out early, feel free to do that. Maybe you have a question about how you tell customer stories or what logos you should pick, anything like that. I'll try to make sure we get your questions to Devin, we get answers for as many as possible. We'll take questions throughout. And yeah, while you guys are all introducing yourselves, so we've got Shelly Wilkinson, Director of Sales, Michelle McLennan, an AE at Nudge, Corey, who's in software sales in Toronto, a couple Toronto folks. Hi, Toronto.
Love Toronto.
Text Expander. I still have never been to Toronto, which I think is a sin.
I haven't been either. I just like what I hear.
Okay, we've got Emma Carey from the customer marketing team at SalesLoft. Welcome, Emma. Dave, who's another AE, a bunch of AEs today. Gabe Acosta, client executive public sector for IT Savvy in California. Very cool. All right, welcome everybody. Thanks so much for announcing yourselves. Now we kind of know who's in the room with us and we can try to be better just for you. With that said, that's all we need to do. The yapping at the beginning is over. Devin, I'll kick it over to you.
Perfect. Well, let's see how smart I am with Zoom. See if we can get this started here.
There it is.
Lovely. Nailed it. First Zoom launch of the week. I guess second. We had a warm up. We're doing good. Perfect. Well, yeah, like you said, Colin, today's all about customer stories. Won't be doing a video training. We're doing it live today. And so what's interesting is that, customer stories are by far the most persuasive tool that a salesperson has. It can be used in a lot of different ways, and we kind of touched on a little bit. Maybe sometimes we use it incorrectly. And so let me see here if I can get my, bear with me one sec. Let me do this. Share my screen. Okay, I got too many desktops. All right. I was hoping I could see the little preview slide, but I think we'll be okay. Here we go. Some of the graphics, if you guys know PowerPoint, you forget where the graphics come in, so you're expecting to see a little bit more than you do. But good. So yeah, so as I was saying, it's the most powerful, but it's least understood, and that's why sometimes they go south, right? And so what we're going to cover today is the number one mistake that people make when they're trying to tell a customer story, why that actually ends up unraveling your deal. And then we've got 3 key principles that we'll jump into to ensure that you're refining your customer story and make sure they're actually helping you win deals instead of obviously losing them. For the folks that are maybe just jumping on now or have been with us, make sure you stick around to the very end. We're going to do a really cool giveaway and exercise at the end of it to help you guys out. And so before we dive into kind of the details, I'll show you a little bit more about this data and how we got here. So folks that might be new to Gong, we're the #1 conversation intelligence platform for sales. This is not a Gong pitch, but the reason why that's important is because we pump out a lot of interesting facts and insights based on the data that we collect. And so we automatically capture phone calls, emails, web conferencing meetings, in-person meetings. And what we do is we record, transcribe, and analyze it using AI. So if you can see here from this 5 million sales calls we're looking at, we take your audio bite, we split it into 2 so you can see where the rep versus the buyer was speaking. And from there, we're able to extract interesting insights, things like where objections happen, where our customer stories occur, and things of that nature where we can start to provide some interesting insights to salespeople.
This is why I love having you all on, because I think the point here is like we can have differences in opinion about how we interpret the data, but at least there's some data, and it's not just Devin's opinion that customer stories are sometimes done wrong. Not that, I mean, I respect your opinions, Devin, you're a smart guy, but we've got data to back this all up.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Opinions are great. It's better to have data. I don't think I'll ever be a data scientist, but this is probably as close as I get to like a sales scientist. Makes me a little more legitimate. And so the thing that we found was that customer stories are typically misapplied. And so if we're looking at this graph, what this is showing is we're looking at the first meeting with a new qualified buyer. So that would be your discovery call, not your, hey, Colin, I caught you on a cold call on your way to work. And so what the data shows here is on the left side in red, we have people who are not using social proof techniques. We're going to bucket social proof and customer stories for this meeting, and I'll kind of explain why they're different later. And so on the right side, you're looking at people who did use social proof. Now you can see immediately there's a minus 47%. There's a 47% decrease in the close rates for the folks who are using social proof.
And here a close is defined as like the deal closes, not that you get to the next step of the sales process, right?
Yeah, exactly. This is going to have the outcome of the deal.
It's pretty incredible that something in a first conversation could have such a big impact that much further down the pipeline.
Exactly. And so that's why a lot of people if you look at the graph alone, you'd think, well, this is crazy. There's no way, social proof is bad, right? Everyone's been coached it, know your customer stories, know your logos. But the problem isn't if it's happening or not. The problem is how it's happening, right? And so doing it correctly can help you. Doing it incorrectly will drastically hurt you. And that's where we get into our polarizing images here, where customer stories are basically like playing with fire, right? You're going to either get burned by doing it incorrectly, or you'll bring a flamethrower to a stick fight. I've personally never been in a stick fight. They sound horrible, but if I were in one, I would love a flamethrower instead, so I could just get over the whole thing immediately.
Would be helpful.
And so again, kind of what we're covering here is, how you can get burned by it and how you can ensure that you end up like the person on the right. Looks like it's having a lot of fun. Might even be Elon Musk's, what is it, the Boring Company? I think they're the ones that came out with those sweet flamethrowers. And so let's go into how we can fix them, right? And so the first thing is we're going to make your customer stories tribal. That's the first principle. And the biggest mistake that people make when they're telling customer stories is that they're exceptionally generic. All right. And you kind of touched on this too, Colin, where you said in the beginning, like, hey, I just looked for my biggest logo, told that story, hope it worked so I could just get more and more like as the enterprise logos go up, then I'm just going to keep, rotating or adding to that list.
Yeah.
That isn't the worst thing in the world to do, but it could be the worst thing in the world unless it's for a specific subset of people that you're giving this story to. And so what we're really finding here is that we're telling generic customer stories. They're stories that do not resonate and therefore do not move people. And when you do it incorrectly or generically, that's when your social proof unravels the deal. That's why you're seeing that big decrease in close rates, is because you're not doing it effectively. And so here's kind of the example we just played out, right? Let me look at all the biggest logos that I have on my website or that I know about, and I'm going to start sharing that, because who doesn't want to do business with someone who sells to Microsoft or NASA or Facebook, right? Or you kind of do what we do when we're interviewing for a job is we go on the website and we look for logos and case studies and just start rattling those off, assuming, hey, these are wins because they're published. And that's true. They are wins because they're published because they're wins, but that doesn't mean it's actually going to be impactful for you in your deal cycle. And so what will happen is your prospects will look as confused as Mark here when yeah, it's a good face. He makes his face at least twice in every movie. I'm confirmed.
Good old Mark.
And so what will happen is people look at this story, like let's say you're Gong, right? You're selling to Gong and you say, hey, we sell to Microsoft and LinkedIn and NASA. And you hear one of two things, right? When it doesn't work, that's great, but our situation is much different. Like, hey, Colin, that sounds cool and all. Like I see you guys got going on. That's not us, right? Or in a more, I'll just call it a straightforward approach is hey, Colin, I really don't care what Walmart is doing or if they're your customer. We're nothing like them. And it kind of feels like an insult to the sales rep when they hear that, but really all you did was you misaligned your customer story. And that's when you started to say, hey, are they actually like me? They take a step back and they go, if your solution is for Walmart and NASA and Microsoft and these huge enterprise companies, and I'm a 200-person company, not only does this not resonate with me, but it sounds like you've got something going on over there that's not for me. And
right,
that's
like
how you're
they end up disqualifying themselves when you were trying to show, hey, you can be part of this elite group. They're like, that's not even close. They think, oh, you're not for me, first thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And when someone says, hey, this is our party and this is who's going, and you're not that people, you go, oh, that's not for me. Like I should not go there. I should not buy this product because it isn't designed for me. And that's why you see the deal unravel, because now their perception has changed from this is for me towards maybe I'm in the wrong room.
So at the crux of this is like, sometimes as reps, it sounds like we oversimplified this. Like when I was doing it, I just thought, pick a great logo, tell the story, it's going to work. I wasn't thinking enough about the actual experience of my buyer. Does that mean I have to, because you had that slide before that showed if you share a story during discovery, you're more likely to hurt your close rate than improve it. Does that mean that I should wait until after discovery, like do my discovery, understand the customer, and then share a story in some other call later on?
Great question. Let's. I'm going to hold 1 second in how to do that because the next slide is going to show what we should do instead.
Perfect. Okay.
And then we'll get into then make sure I come back to when we do it and how to prep for it. And so, and I did the same thing, by the way, Colin, when I got started in sales. And I think a lot of people do it. It's like it's such a big shiny logo. How could you not? How could you not be drawn to it? But instead, that doesn't make it tribal, right? So the concept is to get people on the same level and make sure everyone feels like they're in a tribe. And so these are the things that you can look at. These are the identifiers that you can find and say, oh, I can match you with people that are in the same e-commerce industry. I can match you with people in the same use case or problem process, people in Boston, right? Geography. And so what you want to do is ideally as many of these as you can, but sometimes one is enough, two could be even great, is you want to find these identifiers. And I do it before the call, right? So these identifiers are how you make it a tribal approach. When you do it was your question, Colin. And for me, I can get almost all of this done, at least 2 or 3 of them based on pre-call prep, right? So if I have the two easiest ones, if I have a pre-call prep coming up, or excuse me, I have a call coming up, I'm prepping for it, I can find where your company is. And if you're in Boston, I can find 10 Boston companies we work with, no problem. If you're in the e-commerce space, I can also find 10 e-commerce clients, assuming that we serve that space. And so now, before I even say hi to my prospect, I've got 20 different clients that I can reference. And maybe there's 5 of them that overlap where they're e-commerce and they're in Boston. That's to me is a home run.
Got it. So you also mentioned earlier that there's a difference in your mind between a social proof and a customer story. Sorry if I'm jumping ahead again, but what is the difference in your mind?
I was going to say, let's see if there's the next one before I jump into it. So to me, so the customer story, and we'll get into this in a second, is before and after is a customer story. Social proof is, or kind of the what is it? Yeah, it's kind of social proof. It's like, hey, Juniper Networks increase their close rates 20%, right? If that's the social proof that I give you, that's my customer story. It's not very moving, right?
Got
It's
it.
like if you got into a movie at the end of Star Wars, you've never seen Star Wars before, and you're like, hey, what's Star Wars about? And they're like, oh, Darth Vader is Luke's father. Okay, I don't know. If I have no context of who Darth Vader is or who Luke Skywalker is, it's like, okay, cool. Right. And so what you need to do is provide a before scenario and an after scenario, because that way I can identify with the before, right, what the struggle, what the problem was. And then I'm invested in the process getting to the end results. And then I can relate and desire those end results. And there's a
Got it.
couple
Okay.
slides we can double down on that too.
Cool. Okay. But so for step one, you're basically saying like this takes you probably 5 minutes before the call, select the right customer to mention so that you feel like, so that your prospect will feel like they're part of that tribe, that they're not going to be included in something that's not them, or that they'll feel immediately like disqualified, like, oh, I guess this isn't the solution for me. They only serve, the Department of Defense and Lockheed Martin.
Exactly. Exactly right.
Got it. Cool.
And the other thing too, I'll focus on here is process, because sometimes there might be some folks on that are saying, hey, maybe I'm selling to someone in the UK and it is e-commerce, but we're pretty much North America and we're in SaaS, right? So maybe we can serve them, but we don't really have like a great customer, story here. That's where process might be able to help you out here. It also can be the most confusing one just on site, because like, what does process mean? So process could be, ideally you say, hey, Devin, you're a B2B marketer in a fast growing company in San Francisco. I also work with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Other companies. I go, great, fantastic. But if you don't have that in your back pocket, what you could do that works just as well is, instead of stacking up these different identifiers, is you can pick process and really run with it. And so it can say, hey, Devin, I don't have anyone, selling to a VP of sales, let's say, right? I don't have anyone that's in your geography that sells to salespeople. But what I do have is a handful of clients who are VPs of sales, who are ramping they're about 50 reps, they're ramping really quickly, and most of their calls are done over web conferencing. Then I go, oh, well, that sounds a lot like my team, right? Even though I'm missing some of the other factors, and that can also bring that tribal connection.
Got it. So you can even just make it situational. If you don't have a logo that will immediately make them go, they're like me, you can set it up a little bit, be descriptive about the situation.
Yeah, exactly. If you've got other clients that are red bearded and green shirted, I'm probably going to give you my ear. The next one is principle 2. This is don't just name drop customers, but stampede an entire tribe. I couldn't resist stampede and tribe for, that those word associations go together. But what it's basically saying is, don't just say, oh, I work with, Microsoft, or I worked with, SalesLoft is kind of in our space, right? Don't just name one. There could always be a fluke. It could always just be like, I'm not too sure. But
Yep.
what a real sales pro will do, who knows your book of business or your company, they can rattle off half a dozen customers from the same tribe. And so here, let's pretend we're selling to a marketing software company. We'll run through a quick example here. I run with a lot of examples. I'm glad to have some on the slides. If you're selling to a marketing company, a poor approach would be what we've been talking about. Well, we work with these huge logos: Walmart, Oracle, Fidelity. And they roll their eyes. They look like Mark Wahlberg, right? They're like, okay, but I don't operate like them. I don't look like them. So it alienates. An average seller, be good, not great, better, but not there yet, would say, well, hey, we work with Marketo, Oracle, and Instapage, right? So we're getting closer. We're zeroing in on that marketing identifier. But what a superstar rep would do, and this is a leap and a bound probably above what most folks are doing, but this is what really moves the needle, is, hey, here's all the companies in your space that we work with. There's 17 of them. And here's how many we've gotten in the last 2 years, right? Up from just 4. So now the picture that you're painting isn't just, oh, I have these 3 logos. It's, whoa, there's 17 different companies. Don't need to list all of them, right? I think if you have a slide or a graphic, it does the point for you. And we only had 4 2 years ago, and now we have 17. And it's like, 4x or 2x, whatever math is, right? And so now you're painting this picture of, oh, not only are a ton of my peers falling into this group, but I'm actually late. I'm late to the party. I've got some
Mm.
FOMO setting in because the last 2 years, everyone's been jumping the bandwagon, and I'm over here, don't even know you guys exist.
So what about competitors? Like let's say you're selling to a MarTech company. Would you say we work with your competitor? Is that good idea, bad idea? Do they feel like that's part of their tribe?
I don't. I think that's playing with fire in almost in a more literal sense, in my opinion. And here's why. I know I use sales leaders a lot. Obviously, I work at Gong, but I've sold to sales leaders a ton, so I kind of use them. But some sales leaders I've talked to, and they are very interested in what their competitors are doing. Right?
Mm.
It's like enemy number one. They want to know what they're doing. They want to know what they eat for breakfast. They want to defeat them at all costs.
Right.
The other side are there's people who get offended that you're trying to leverage their direct competitor to get them to move. I've had people say, like, respond to a just simple email. Someone says like, "Hey, who do you report, or sorry, who do you work with?" And I say, "Oh, it's competitor one, someone else, and maybe competitor two." And they've been like, "I can't believe you would, try to motivate me to buy based on who my competitors are." So it's a long way of saying there's no silver bullet there. My advice in this scenario is not to leverage a customer, or excuse me, to leverage a direct competitor, because it
Right.
can have that polarizing effect. I think this is strong enough where if you're like, hey, we work with 17 folks in the marketing space, we've quadrupled in the last 2 years, let them ask you, well, hey, do you by chance also work with NetSuite? Oh yeah, hey, we do work with NetSuite. I imagine you guys are direct competitors. We are. And then that
So
can
we've
kind
got
of
it.
open the conversation more organically than me trying to kind of like point like, hey, by the way, you're not doing what your competitors are doing.
Got it. I see. I see. Makes sense. We've got another really good question, which kind of points out that there's maybe a potential downside where you'd have to be careful. So Matthew Power says he's sitting in a room with a couple top sales reps and loves the concept of social proof. Asks, what happens when they ask for a reference? Like, does sharing social proof increase the likelihood or open the door for more reference requests, which we all know can kind of slow down a deal and maybe be helpful, but maybe not.
Yeah, absolutely. These are kind of two different tactics, if you will. This is probably done a little bit more early stage. I personally always kept my customer references for a late stage. Like I don't want to put someone who's not very serious to buy in front of a client, right? I don't want to burn my ass with a client, even if they're, good friend and a raving fan. And so I always use that little late stage to make sure they're really ready to buy. It's kind of like the last switch, like let's make sure we get pricing. I want to talk to a customer, right? What they both have in common is you're using an emotional response, or using an emotional like tactic to persuade them, right? You're saying, hey, all these people are already doing it. It's a safe decision. You can go ahead and trust us.
Right.
If this does lead to more reference clients, or excuse me, reference requests, I think that's a good thing. People go, okay, cool. Now you're basically saying, I want to learn more. I want to know, how Gigya specifically did it. Can you put me in touch? And it's okay to say, hey, you know what? Gigya is a great example, but you know what? I think Altruic would be better. And in the back of your head, you go, I know the people at Altruic could be an easier connection, right? I can make that happen better and faster. So it's all just about navigating it from there.
Got it. So you'd have to have some kind of intimate knowledge. So one of the things this just reminded me of, I heard, those like late night shows where they're trying to sell jewelry or collect donations or something. And you call in the telemarketer, and there's people waiting on the phones, right? I heard this story where they changed that line, where the phones are standing by or something like that. They changed it to, if our lines are busy, please call back.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually increased the sales by something crazy, like 40%, a big, big
Yeah,
number, because it implied that other people were also already calling. Not that, oh, we're waiting for you. We're here when you're ready, and we'll just sit here and wait.
exactly.
Very different. So we got another really good question here. That if you've ever had concerns about name dropping clients, like, do you ever have to be careful about that?
Yeah, you do. And the reason is sometimes when people sign, they'll put a clause in there like you cannot mention us in any written form or any marketing material. So you want to be respectful of that, right? And it's usually your large enterprise clients that have those, I would say desires, but oftentimes they're demands in the negotiation in terms. So you don't want to, you don't want to piss off Marketo if they just signed with you. One, they just signed with you.
Yep.
And two, they're obviously like a big logo and client. So yeah, as you're kind of wrapping, maybe you're making a list as you're thinking these things through. I mean, we have well over, I don't know, 500 clients, and I think there's about 5 that we know we can't talk about. So you should probably either make a list of what you can talk about, or maybe a smaller list of what you can't talk about, just to make sure you don't slip.
Got it. Cool. Thanks for the question, Alexis. We've got a couple more questions, but I'm gonna let you move on and hold on to a couple of these for later. Thanks, Devin.
Yeah, of course. All right, let's see where we were. Messages not, I'm just reading it now that we're a little off. I'm going to get back into it. Yeah, this is kind of this is the whole point we are just talking about, right? Like the phone line, the listing off a bunch of people. It's not that you work with just one type of customer or Marketo specifically because they're so great, but it's the concept of bandwagoning, right? You're late to the show, and you should be catching up.
Right.
All right, Invoke self-discovery is principle number 3. I always love this guy of all of our graphics. I don't know what's in that thing, but he is pumped to have it.
Well, that's good.
So the concept of self-discovery, this is the one we had kind of talked about earlier. So we might have jumped ahead. It sounds a little repetitive. The concept of self-discovery is really saying, I need to identify myself in the story. And this is natural. People love talking about themselves. We naturally are drawn to other people that look like us, that act like us. And so the reason why, this story is going to land, and this is how much stories do it, is because you're starting with the ending, right? My Luke Skywalker usage earlier, which was terrible because everyone knows who Darth Vader is, but we got the idea. So if your customer story sounds like, one of our customers, Gibato Networks, increased conversion rates by 26%, and then you're quiet like that, waiting for a reaction, you might not get one. Or you might get oh, that's nice, that's cool. And the reason is you're missing the identifier and the story arc, right? The best movies, you start with this character, they go through some trial, and then when they get that triumphant moment, the most climatic part of the movie, that's where you get the joy from, right? You see where they started, and you see the change across the movie. That's what makes a great story a great story.
So I'm going to pause for one quick second. Who had these questions? So Michelle McLennan asked a question, what if we don't have a lot of examples? And Shelley Wilkinson asked, what if there are confidentiality agreements? For both of you, Michelle and Shelley, I feel like this is the answer to your question. Sorry, Devin, go ahead.
Yeah, no, you're actually, I was literally just about to say that this is where that process example can come in, right? And it's actually okay. It's not the best thing to do, but if you had to, if all you had in your toolkit was, hey, Colin, I'm not allowed to say who the customer is, but they're in marketing, they're 1,000 employees, et cetera. But I think the story is what's really going to resonate with you. And then you tell a really good part, and I'll kind of get into it. Then you tell a really good story. It's not a home run. Everyone wants that logo, but it's better than nothing. And it's better than just using that social proof, that 26%. And so for point A, that's where that self-discovery happens, right? We need to start with our before. That's I'm a sales VP with 50 reps. We're growing rapidly, and this is how we do business and what our goals are, right? So it's like almost everything else, basically, is what you think about it. Most of us are only starting with point B. And so this is kind of the secret sauce. I think I kind of just talked to this a little bit. Here's kind of the biggest slide here and why this is so important. If you're wanting to screenshots or want to save something for your desk, would be my takeaway. If your story describes their problem better than they can describe it themselves, they will automatically assume you have the best solution. So again, that's those identifiers. If you can say, if you understand what your target buyer, your target audience is dealing with, what they're struggling with, what those processes are, you can recite it back to them and then tell them how you've changed their lives for the better and a percentage point of how it changed. That's a grand slam. It does not get any better than that. And that's why, customer stories can drive trust and credibility with you, is because you're describing this problem so well that they are like, wow, this person really gets it. They've done it multiple times. They worked with people that are like me, and then they've got this nice data proof to touch on the, the more rational, less emotional side of that decision.
So I'm wondering, I'm gonna put you on the spot here, Devin.
Sure.
I would love to hear like a real life example. Can you give me
Yeah,
an example of like a story that you would tell from the before and after, just for Gong? I know we're not doing a
sure.
pitch here, but I think it would be a useful example.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me give you an example. So I'll use the one that was my favorite when we were selling to a CRO or chief sales officer, SVP, somewhere in that high ranking head of sales. And their challenge would be, and this is kind of a part of the preempt or kind of the build up before the story, right? So I'm not just diving right into a story here. Is whenever a sales leader would be struggling to roll out a new sales messaging, new sales pricing, new methodology. This is a story that I would typically tell. So I'd say, hey, Colin, you're Colin, you'll be my prospect. So, hey, Colin, definitely understand the challenge that you're dealing with here. Our CRO just came from LinkedIn, and his SVP of sales wanted to mitigate the risk of churn after year one. So the new law in place, the new thing was 2-year deals. He wanted everyone on the sales floor pushing 2-year deals because this was the strategic initiative. So he did what all sales leaders do. He rallied the troops. He got all of the reps in a room with the managers and enablement, went through some training, did the role play. At the end of it, he looked at his team and he said, how do you guys feel? Do you feel confident in this? Everybody nodded their head. He said, great. Are you guys going to go do this? Everybody nodded their head. He said, great. He quickly realized the next day, about 8:30 a.m., that he had no way to truly know if anyone was pushing 2-year deals on their calls, except for literally walking up and down the hallway, hoping to hear people on the phone say 2-year deals. Then once he rolled out Gong, he had an executive dashboard that he could simply see across his whole team who is and is not going to market with this new messaging. And for the folks that are, isolating it and being able to replicate and share that across the team to drive adoption and also help your go-to-market efforts. End scene.
Got it. Okay, so I like that because I'm glad you shared an example. When I was thinking example, I was thinking something still like very, very succinct, but you really paint a picture there of all the little interactions, the little mini conversations that happened within that pain point. And so when you build out that kind of detail, that's when I hear like you understand that problem. You really get it.
100%. And for that example, I've been on the other side where it's, hey, I've been the rep where we have a new pricing model, right? And I know how difficult it is to try to get anyone to do something new, right? I was always one who, wanted to make my boss look good, wanted to be, first to sell a gold package in that example. So it was easier for me, but I knew the other people in the room who were probably better salespeople than I was and just did not want to pick up this new messaging. So I told that story. And that's when those identifiers are, Colin, if you can pick them up or folks listening, those identifiers were rallying the troops and getting them into a room. It was looking at the team, asking them a question and getting the quiet nod.
Yeah, right.
It was walking up and down hallways, right? Those little things. It wasn't, I couldn't do this and now I could do this. And I didn't have that and I did. That's the framework, but it doesn't really make a great story.
Right. Right. It's the little human elements, the little like the silent head nod that is painful for any sales leader to see because it just leaves them actually wondering, like, is that actually?
Yeah, because how often does someone like, hey, Colin, do you agree? And you're like, yeah. Like, you have no idea what they're talking about. It's like the gut reaction, like when your boss asks you for anything, just you can't go wrong with a good head nod.
So Michael Zrobeck, hi Mike, has a question here. It's great to refer to current or former customers, but how do you get that first customer? I know this is maybe a little outside the scope today, but I thought you might have some insight. I have an idea that I can share, but I want to hear your advice, Devin.
Is the question, and Colin, you're reading it, so maybe it was, you can help me here. Is the question how to, like, you have no customers, how do I tell my first potential customer a customer story?
Exactly.
So the one I've luckily never been in that place, but what I have heard work in the backup is to tell the kind of like the creation story of the company and what that problem ran into. Like, so if you think of Shark Tank, I'm a big fan of Shark Tank, is a lot of the times it's like, a mom of 3 or a dad or something. And they're like, hey, I was at a picnic and I couldn't keep all 3 of my kids together. So what I did is I built a stroller for 3 kids. It's not a Shark Tank idea. Steal it if you love it. And Then they go through all this pain and the problem, and then they go, here's my product and here's how great it is. And then they go, how many sales do you have? And the person goes, oh, we're pre-revenue, right? You know those examples. And so they don't have anyone using this new stroller, but what they did is you can paint a really good picture of why you created it in the first place, how you experienced that problem, or maybe your founder experienced that problem, and that's why they created this, and now it's working for your company, and you want to spread the gospel, so to speak.
Love it. That was even better than my advice, which was give it away the first time, and then you get a trade, right? Trade, say, I'll give it to you if after 6 months we can do a case study and I use you as a reference 3 times or something like that.
Yeah, I think that works too. And I think it's okay to tell people like, hey, we don't have, you want to be mindful. You don't want to say, hey, we don't have anyone who's bought this yet. Cause then it's like, well, I don't want to be in that tribe. I'm in the right tribe right now by not buying your product. But I think, like you said, don't try to fabricate it. Don't make anything fake, just to call it what it is. Maybe give something away for free, CEO story, maybe both.
Love it. I love CEO story. Cool. What else do we have?
All right. That's a good question. All right. So we're going to get into an example here. I think we've done a good job, but this will kind of hammer it home. I'm going to leverage Alcoholics Anonymous. It's a little edgy. It's definitely respectful, but it's the best example that we could find here. And so what AA doesn't do is lead with the end result. So if you go onto, I don't know if it's AA.org, whatever their website is, what you're not going to see is the quote here, which is AA changed my life. My career is back on track. My family is better than ever. Because those are end results. And you're talking to people who are on this website who have very possibly not accepted that there's a problem or isn't quite ready to take those first steps. Fair?
Yeah, sure.
And so what you need to do is lead with the problem, because that's what folks are going to identify with, right? So you might see things like, it started with a few drinks on the weekend. That soon became a few drinks every day. Eventually I couldn't relax at night without a few drinks. My family noticed. There might be one more. That's when I realized I needed to change. Now, just reading this off, that feels a lot more emotional than the first part, right? You can relate to this, even if someone who maybe doesn't have this challenge, I can relate to that by itself. And so that's why if you can get customers to see themselves in the story, those identifiers, those rallying the troops, I didn't have visibility, I couldn't do this thing, and then they'll come to their self-discovery, and then that's when you can say, well, here's how you can change it with our product, service, offering.
Love it.
For a more B2B example, and this is kind of the same one I was playing around with, one of our happy clients, Paul Snelson, his quote was, I had 70 reps handling 70 calls in 70 different ways. It was chaos, and surprises were the rule, not the exception. That has nothing to do with anything that Gong has done, right? It hasn't done anything with results yet. But a lot of VPs of sales or directors or managers can probably go, hey, I have 10 reps, but they're all doing whatever, who knows what they're doing? It's chaos. And so by people identifying with it, they lean in and then they go, well, now tell me chapter 2, what happened afterwards? Sorry, go ahead, Colin, I cut you off.
No, that's perfect. I was going to say sometimes you get that too good to be true feeling. And when you see these stories of like the starting or origination of some of these people who, they've solved all their problems, it's great. You see that, you're too good to be true. When you see their origination story, you're kind of like, oh, okay. Like, yeah, maybe I can solve my problem too. And these guys seem like they're the ones to do it.
100%. And you think too, like we don't always, the 100 plus people listening, hardly ever do we get to start with the decision maker. Yeah. Right. And so you need to enable your champion, your lower mid-level person, to go to bat to the CFO and say, here's why we should buy Gong, for example. Now, do you think it would be more powerful, Colin, for that person to go, hey, CFO, I'm projecting 6% increase in close rates by buying Gong because this case study who's similar to us had 10%. Or them coming through and saying, hey, how we have 70 reps handling 70 calls in 70 different ways? We have no idea what's really working over there. Gong's going to help us solve that. And also they've helped increase close rates by 10% for this company that looks like this.
Yeah, definitely. That second one's way more powerful. If I'm that person's manager, I'm going to listen much more readily to that second example.
Exactly. And the CFO they might be, depending on how big of the company, they might not know the chaos that's in the sales org. They might hear
Yeah.
rumors, but they don't know the insides and outs. So again, when you bring them just the latter half, which is the improvement, even though they're a CFO, they're still going to work on the emotional side of their brain as well. And so that's why these stories, these before, are so critical. All right. Oh, there we go. I just beat myself to the punch. Lead with then you can get into the outcome, those results, percentages, those nice ROI docs that you guys all have. I would say I think that's it. I just get ahead of ourselves. more graphics to what we were talking about. But yeah, I think we really hammered it home here is when you're telling a customer story, what I would do is, and this will get to our end point here, this is what you probably already have, right? You probably have a stat, a case study. The fun part is working backward. What was the challenges? Like, why couldn't they get 20% more increase in close rates, or why were their mid-funnel conversions so low? That's where you really get to see how. And the other way you can think of it too is, how did you sell your best client? What were the problems that they experienced? What were the outcomes of that pain? And then how did you change it? And that's how you start to refine your customer story and have one that I shared about, the CRO who had to walk the hallways.
Love it. You know what? This takes time. I think the key thing here is like, give it the time it does. For me, this was my biggest takeaway. It felt like something I could just slap together really quick and easy, find a logo, name drop them, and move on. But it feels like if you take the, I don't know, half an hour to an hour to, segment out, these are my people I'm going to mention. This is the story, that I want to focus on for the CRO. This is the story I'll focus on for the rep or buyer number 2. If you take the time to prep this out beforehand, then you've got the arsenal forever, and you can bring your flamethrower to the stick fight.
Yeah. I was looking at this as you're talking, and I was like, I guess you're either holding the flamethrower, winning the stick fight, or you're just burning your deal down if you do it incorrectly. I guess it plays both both parts. But it's funny too with these customer stories. Like, it's not just on discovery calls. I found them even just like today, Colin. Like, I didn't know you were going to ask me to do that customer story on the spot, but when I'm out in events and I'm like, someone comes up to me and goes, "Oh, hey, Devin, I'm talking to Jordan on the sales team," and I have no idea what their company is. And they go, "Hey, our CRO isn't too sure about it, right? He doesn't really know much. What would you say? How's Gong help CROs?" That customer story becomes very impactful, right? So it's not just it has one outlet, which is discovery calls, or even during my deal, when people are on the train asking you about your company, when you meet a CRO or an ideal, buyer, you're going to have these stories, which again, you're describing the story so well, you're going to assume that they can solve the problem better than they
Right. Love it. I love it. It reminds me of Game of Thrones season 8 when what works better than a good story? Something like that.
Yeah, nothing.
Nothing. It's really moving, and it's more attention grabbing. It makes you feel like it's a better conversation, and the rep's not just saying like 20% ROI, 15% increase in close rates, blah, blah, blah. We've got a couple minutes for questions. There were some really good questions from Michelle and Alexis and Matthew throughout. Sure. So if anybody else has any others for Devin, feel free to put them in there now. Otherwise, I'm back in your day. After.
Sure. Well, while you field a couple questions, Colin, I'm going to jump to the next part here, which is helping you guys, the folks who are listening, to help you with your customer stories. And so we covered a lot of tactics. I'm sure you're probably writing down on a piece of notepad how you can make them better. I want to help. So all you have to do is, or after this, I'm going to select 2 people from the attendee list at random. And all you have to do is go to gong.io and sign up for a demo. Throw your email address in there. We've got a whole marketing operation. It'll help me get back to you faster. Blow up my LinkedIn inbox. It takes me some time to dig out of it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick 2 people, and we're going to workshop your customer story. You give me a call, give me a little bit of info about you and the company. We'll meet and greet, and then pitch me your customer story. Then we'll spend 10, 15 minutes. I'll give you some tips. We can refine it on the spot, and you can pitch it back to me at the end of the session and make sure that you have a home run. So if that sounds of interest to you, if you want to get better, get free sales tips via Sales Hacker, free training via Devin if you're interested, jump over to gong.io/demo, throw your email in there, and we'll get you started. That's my plug, Colin. I will be your Q&A bot for the rest of the time.
That's a good plug. And honestly, if I wasn't going to steal a spot from somebody else, I'd take you up on it. Maybe you and me can catch up some other time.
Yeah.
We got a good question from Alexis Matthews. Thanks, Alexis. At what point during the discovery call should you share your story? Is there a timing it's better later on? I know the recording earlier showed it was kind of maybe at the 60% mark.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm at the risk of, I always have to say there's no silver bullet. So there's always an exception to the rule. What I've always done and what I've trained the SDRs here to do as they're prepping their prepping qual calls and discovery calls is I try to do it right at kind of the end of a use case when I'm getting what does that mean? Getting a weird notice on my computer. Let me know if I lose you, Colin.
Okay.
Okay, I got an antivirus pop up. You got to take those seriously these days. But what I do is someone says, hey, we're starting to get through kind of, how Gong is going to help, right? And so they say, oh, Devin, we're ramping 20 reps the rest of this year. I got to make sure they're up and running. I go, okay, how are you currently doing that? What is the biggest challenges? Where are you trying to get? So I'm basically unpacking this use case. And when I get to a point where I feel like I've quantified it a bit, right? So it's like, okay, so if we get these 20 reps ramped on time, you hit your number, here's what we have to do it, right? And you kind of get a little, game plan and ROI there. Then I go, hey, Colin, this sounds really familiar to one of our companies called Instapage. We work with XYZ, 3, 4 more, but Instapage sounds just like you guys, and here's why. And then I go into that CRO story, right? Or one of similar, kind of a similar one. So quick answer is I run through some discovery, I kind of pinpoint a use case, really drive it home, and then I kind of put the icing on top of a great customer story.
I love that. Like it proves that you listened because you can repeat back with another true story, more or less what they just told you.
Exactly. And the other time where I would say maybe 5-ish% will come up is maybe someone gets on the line and they don't know anything about you, right? And they're just like, tell me about you. Tell me what you guys do. How can you help me? And then it's really helpful because it's kind of like you're kind of getting put on the spot there, right? They kind of want you to, it almost feels like they want you to be wrong or misstep. That's the best time where you're just like, honestly, Colin, hey, we haven't done any discovery yet, so I don't know much about you, but I see that you're in Boston. I see that you're the CRO, and I see you guys are in the e-commerce space. Based on that alone, here's how I think we could help. And then you can go into that customer story and be like, how did I do? Did that resonate? And if it did, you hit the home run. They're even surprised, like, wow, this person really knows, what we're going through, or at least in the ballpark. And then you can kind of crack open the discovery call and go from there. So hopefully that was helpful.
I love that answer. That was helpful for me. Hopefully it was helpful for Alexis. Got another good question from Luke Binder. He says he's a CSM working mainly with renewals. Can you talk about how maybe that would be useful for his use case stories? Like when, in that sales process, that sales cycle, when and how would you use stories?
Yeah, it's great. I think you can use it in twofold. If you're looking at, to me, and you could correct me if there's a follow-up here if possible, but CSMs, the role can be a little different at different companies. But if you're going for kind of maybe the more common one, which is driving adoption, you have a lot of information on the client you're already selling to, right? Maybe you've been working with them for 6 months, you know what their previous problems are. What you can do is be very proactive in suggesting what they do next. So it's like, hey, I saw that you just, I don't know, reviewed your 50th call in Gong. That's fantastic. And I see you guys are focused on cold calling. Well, hey, we got this other client who's doing the same thing. They were right to where you are, and they found a lot of success by moving forward, now looking at the demos, right? And here's how they did that. So you can be more prescriptive because you have so much context on that client and you have so much information on how your clients succeed with your product. You can start to make those matches.
One of the things that I thought of, and this may be a bad idea, you tell me, maybe Luke even knows better than me, was, if somebody's not going to renew, it's likely because, maybe they're switching to another service or they think that they just don't, it's not solving their problem. Maybe they don't feel like they have the problem. Would you ever want to tell a story, like a negative story? Like, oh yeah, I had this one customer who didn't renew after year 1 and 6 months later they came back because XYZ happened and it turned out that we were able to help them solve that problem.
I think if done tactfully, it could be. The place my mind always goes, Colin, is like, make sure in your story, you're going to set up tribes. You either bought or you didn't. You either renewed or you didn't. You just want to make sure that story puts them in the right tribe. Right. It doesn't say, well, hey, they renewed for 6 months, they were fine, and then they came back. Like, well, I can do that too, right?
Right.
I would just say like I think there's a way to tell that story of like, hey, you could leave and go to this other company, but you'll probably lose out on this, which would impact Y. I think that would be a little bit more compelling, probably. But I think again, it's kind of how you workshop it and how you tell that story.
Love it. Okay, so it comes back to the tribe and how you get them identifying themselves.
And I say that because I've had people do it to me where they put me in the wrong tribe, and I'm like, oh, that's actually right. I'm actually going to keep going this direction. I actually don't need you.
Oh yeah. Okay, so it's something to be careful of.
Yeah.
Let's see. All right, let's take this as the last question. I think it's an interesting point to end on. Tony Lai says he's not an SDR but wants to become one.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any creative way that he could use this in interviews, or is this just does it just not fit?
Yeah, no, you can definitely use it in interviews. And the way I kind of view this is like you're being exceptionally proactive. You're trying to go above and beyond. And when you're going above and beyond, it's okay if you're a little off the mark. So, and by the little off the mark, I mean, maybe you don't tell that customer story perfectly or you don't transition it perfectly because you haven't even been onboarded by the company, right? And so what I think you could do is, and this is me off the top of my head here, I think Tony would be, hey, I saw on your website, you guys have, let's just say they have 5 customer stories or, case studies. I would find one that like 2 that overlap, like maybe they're the enterprise ones, right? Take the easier route, or maybe they're 2 in e-commerce or 2 in Chicago. And you could say, hey, Colin, hiring manager, if I were hired, here's what I would do. My point of attack would be I would go for the Boston and Seattle areas because I see from your customer testimonials online that that's where a lot of your happiest clients are. So I would use that social proof to start to build trust in that community. And then use the, whatever those, those case studies, the actual use, the pain and the solve are, I would, recite it back to them. Like, it sounds like you guys are solving for, shipment deficiencies late for retailers. I would target Seattle and Philadelphia or whatever I just said and go to market there. And that's how I would build pipeline from you on day one. I think that would be really emphatic because even the fact that you're thinking so proactively and so ahead of like, when I get this job, this is how I'll do it. I have a game plan. I don't just need your playbook. That'll separate you from at least 80% of the people going for the same role.
Yeah. And listen, if you've never had, you could even think of your employers as your like tribe as, so when I was at this previous job, they had this problem, they hired me, I solved the problem. They had this quota, they hired me, I hit the quota.
Yep.
As long as you're putting the employer in the right tribe, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. All right, Devin, thanks so much for stopping by.
Of course.
Everybody, if you enjoyed this and you want to do more work on this, we have some great questions. It sounds like some people are enthusiastic and ready to workshop these a little bit more. Go to gong.io/demo, request a demo. Devin will get in touch with you, and he'll select 2 people out of everybody that requests and work on you with your customer stories. Thanks for stopping by. Hope to see you on another Sales Hacker webinar soon. And Devin, thanks again for joining us. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Colin. Thanks everyone for joining. If you're looking for a LinkedIn Connect, hit me up. We'd love to connect.